Hello, hello, and welcome to today's podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about metabolism in midlife. This has been coming up a lot with our patients recently, so we figured it was a great time to really talk about it with you guys.
And I think metabolism, maybe people just don't understand what metabolism really means, but what we're really going to kind of focus in on today is more of insulin resistance. And that may also be something people don't understand what it means. So I hope we can kind of shed a little bit of light on that maybe today, what it truly does mean, or at least give you some food for thought to kind of start thinking about that. And maybe something to take to your next, provider meeting, if you will. So some of these things we'll talk about today will hopefully spark a little interest and create some curiosity for people. Exactly.
One thing that we have been saying as we've been having these conversations is that insulin resistance is the pre-diabetes.
Right. Yeah. So, a lot of folks are always worried about, obviously the biggest crisis we're having right now in healthcare, in our healthcare community, is truly the onset of type 2 diabetes. Well, there's a lot of theories and thoughts behind what's really driving that. But, it's kind of incredible the fact that here we are spending so much money on healthcare, and yet we're having a decrease in life expectancy and an increase in chronic disease. And, so we're not going to necessarily go through all the specific details about why that is and the causes, but we're going to try to focus in and kind of hone in on the insulin resistance part of that. So, because it's a little more of a cellular level, and we'll try to keep it out of the weeds again, and try to keep it more on a superficial level so that we can kind of all have a conversation about it.
Yeah. So what we're seeing in our patients is a fasting glucose level that is pretty normal as far as the normal guidelines go. And then they're even having a pretty normal hemoglobin A1C, like 5.2 or 5.3, which is
right.
Pre-diabetes doesn't start until 5.7.
Right.
So when you go to your regular doctor and they order a glucose and an A1C, and those are what your numbers look like, it looks like you're good. But what we've noticed in our patients recently is we also draw that insulin, the fasting insulin. And what we're seeing is that even though that fasting glucose looks okay and that hemoglobin A1C looks okay, there's insulin resistance going on. We've got Homa-IR scores, which is a calculation where you take your fasting glucose and your fasting insulin, and you come up with this Homa-IR score, which you want it to be close to 1 is optimal.
Correct.
And we're finding people that have elevated Homa-IR in the 3s and 4s.
Right.
Have no idea that they're having any trouble with insulin resistance.
Right. They have no idea they're insulin resistant, and they've got metabolic syndrome. And when you think about metabolic syndrome, these are people that have the abdominal adiposity, the abdominal waste, that's easy to say today, increases in high blood pressure. They've also got elevated blood sugars, triglycerides, as well as a low HDL. So it creates this metabolic milieu that occurs. And so...
Yeah. And I think you said high glucose level, but really what you were meaning is high triglycerides.
High triglycerides. Yes. Yeah. I said, but yes, high glucose and high triglycerides.
Right. But these patients that we're seeing didn't really have high glucose, but they did have high triglycerides. So that's another indication. Right. So something to look at when you go to the doctor and they do draw triglycerides. That's part of a lipid panel. So if you have a regular fasting glucose and a regular normal hemoglobin A1C, if your triglycerides are elevated, that's an indicator to look a little deeper.
Right. Yeah. So there's some enzyme issues that are occurring inside that liver that create that problem. So, but what we also want to kind of, let's give you an analogy. I love analogies, and it's kind of how we can remember things. So when we're talking about insulin resistance, what we mean by that is that, you can think of it that insulin is like the lock, and like the key. Let's get it straight. The insulin is like the key, and the cells are like where the lock is. So when the cells have the lock that's rusty, the key doesn't work so well. So you can have a lot of keys, you can keep trying keys, but it doesn't seem to unlock the cell to allow the energy, if you will, which is a glucose, to get into the cell to produce the effect. And that's kind of where we're going with that. So what we want to do is we want to make those keys very effective, and we want to decrease the rustiness of the lock on the cells.
Yeah. So some of the symptoms of insulin resistance, what we may have already talked about a little bit, but belly fat, fatigue after meals, sugar cravings, skin tags, irregular periods for women.
And then there's a condition called acanthosis nigrans, which is essentially, it's a fancy little dermatology condition where individuals will have this dark patchy appearance to the skin, specifically around the neck and armpit areas. So that's something that we'll typically sometimes see for folks, but that's usually well advanced. That is something that's been going on for years. So those individuals that probably truly do have more problems, which are identifiable on various different metabolic markers.
And that may sound really similar to things that you've heard about PCOS, which is definitely connected. Yeah. Insulin resistance is one of the key drivers of PCOS.
Yeah. Until you correct the insulin resistance on PCOS, you can't correct the symptoms associated with PCOS. So that insulin resistance is very important.
So we'll go a little bit more now into the primary lab markers for insulin resistance. And I think the key one that is very rarely drawn is the fasting insulin. And optimally, you want that between 2 and 6. Insulin resistance is indicated when you're over 10. Now, your normal range goes all the way up to 25.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's hard to believe you can call somebody normal with an insulin level of 25, but those folks are very insulin resistant at that stage. So, but that's certainly, optimal, like she says, is need to be. I would like to see that under 5 in general for most folks. But that's a key thing that unfortunately just not is drawn, and that's a $10 lab. From a self-pay standpoint, literally $10. So that is pretty cheap information.
Mm-hmm. And then Homa-IR is the other one that we're looking at quite often. And like I said, that's the calculation between the two, and over 2 is likely indicative of.
Yeah. And that's a calculation. That's not something that you can just draw a Homa-IR lab. It doesn't work that way. You have to get the components to put it into the equation. And you can do that online, actually. And then, of course, fasting glucoses, we like to see those optimally below 85. Normal is going to be up to 99, 100, but it's that is not, optimal normal is going to be on the lab's values less than 100. So, but certainly we like to see it under 85 to see that increase in sensitivity for insulin for folks.
And one thing I always like to talk about when we talk about fasting glucose is there are a lot of things that can cause your glucose to spike and be high. So even if you're fasting and you go in, if you've had a particularly stressful situation or you're really scared of needles, that can cause a glucose spike to make it show up a little bit higher. Mm-hmm. And just something to consider.
Stress.
Another piece of why we look at all these markers together at the same time.
Exactly.
Because that's what really gives us the snapshot of what's going on.
Yeah, it's an accumulation. So some of these things they'll change within minutes. Some of these things change within days. So you have to take all this into consideration, and fasting is the best way to get these things done too. Then next is, hemoglobin A1C, which we spoke about before. So.
Right. And that is a picture of what your blood sugar has done over the past 3 months or so. So it's an indicator of what your sugar is doing
Average.
overall. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually something that can also catch things like when you have a really good fasting glucose but you do eat a lot of sweets and find yourself spiking frequently, you might have a higher hemoglobin A1C.
I don't know why you're acting like that. So it sounds like I have that problem sometimes. Anyway, the A1C, CDC talks about, diabetes will start at 6.5, but pre-diabetic will be 5.7 to 6.4. So, but we like to see that close to 5. 5 is a good solid number to try to shoot for. It's not easy to do that. You gotta watch the sugars and the breads and the alcohol to help try to keep that in control. And then, we spoke about the triglyceride to HDL ratio. That optimally needs to be 1-to-1. If we've got elevated triglycerides and lower HDL levels, then that's going to throw that ratio off. And so that can be an indicator for early stages of insulin resistance. And it's, I hate to bring up another topic, but that's not just because we need to take a statin. There's other problems going on here. So, but that triglyceride is something we got to keep that low.
And then uric acid is another marker that you can look at. And that is a different way to kind of look at sugar, more on the fructose side.
Yeah,
so optimally, you'd like that less than 5.5. Yep. It varies a little bit for men and women, but
uric acid is not just, excessive levels of that, yes, can lead to gout, but this is a diet related problem which can be controlled. And I'm not talking about the fructose that's in fruit. We're talking about that's got the fiber and a slower way to get in your system. Whereas if you're drinking the sodas, which are high fructose corn syrups, those things are what are going to create that elevated uric acid levels. And the reason why we talk about the uric acid, because it is an inflammatory marker, which can lead to atherosclerotic heart disease, as well as other inflammatory processes, which affect our brain, our heart, liver, kidneys.
All the things. So then the liver enzymes that we're looking at are ALT and AST. And when you have an elevated ALT that's higher than your AST, that's when you start looking at fatty liver disease, which is very closely related to insulin resistance.
Yeah. So if your body's always, your bloodstream always has sugar floating around and it's not being used efficiently or not being utilized very well, then it's going to go somewhere and the liver is going to create some fat. So it's just kind of what happens and stores it.
So the next thing to look at, you think insulin resistance is pre-diabetes, and then you're going to look at pre-diabetes. And the fasting glucose for pre-diabetes is 100 to 125.
Right. So yeah, when you get above 125 and 126 or higher, then that's you're technically diabetic, and this is a fasting glucose. So, hemoglobin A1Cs, as we spoke about, when you get above 6.5 or higher, that's when you're going to become diabetic. So, and then of course there's also the old dreaded 2-hour glucose tolerance test, where you have to drink basically two cans of Coke. It's a similar amount of sugar as two cans of Coca-Cola, and then you check that. But our 2-hour glucose level should be, under 140 is more optimal. But when you're starting to get into 140 to 199, that can be more of a pre-diabetic situation. So, and diabetics will be over 200. So, but our body, with this impaired glucose metabolism is essentially just our body's having trouble managing our blood sugar because we're just pounding it too much. There's things that we'll talk about here towards the end on ways that we can help to improve that and reduce that level for folks. So, but you can think of another analogy is, diabetes is like a sugar traffic jam, which is kind of an odd thing. I mean, you imagine that your bloodstream is like the highway, And then the glucose, which is the sugar, is like the delivery trucks, bringing the fuel to your body's cells. So the insulin is like the little traffic cop that directs those trucks off the highway and into the fuel storage stations where your muscles and your brain and your organs are. So that's when that happens, either this traffic cop's not working or it's not working properly. And so the fuel stations just don't respond very well. And everything kind of gets backed up, and that's where the traffic jam occurs. And then that's where you can start leading into damage to the organs, and the system starts to slow down.
So the next kind of thing to talk about is metabolic flexibility, and how do we get our body to be really good at burning sugar and then
transition over to burning fat.
You can kind of think of this like a hybrid car, where your body, when it's burning gas, is burning glucose, and when it's on electric, it's burning fat.
Yeah, so the glucose is more for quick burn, efficiency, high production, fast movements, if you will. You can think of it that way. And whereas the electricity is more for long lasting, which is the fat, for longer, ideal kind of endurance type things. So that's something that helps us to kind of keep that straight.
Yeah. So after a meal, we want to burn glucose to get that moving through our system. But overnight, we want to be really tapping into our fat stores as we're resting and recovering. When you go on a really long walk, and this is kind of where VO2 max testing comes in. If you were to go on an extended exercise like a walk or a marathon, something like that, you're going to burn both. You're going to burn glucose and you're going to be burning fat, hopefully.
Yeah. So usually in the zone 2 conversation type activity is where you're going to burn more fat. But when you start really huffing and puffing going up a hill, well, okay, you're going to be burning a little more glucose because your body needs it faster. It needs it quicker. So it's going to capture that glucose and try to burn that first for the energy. So what in the real life, how does this really show up? How does our inefficiencies tend to show up? It shows up by kind of an energy roller coaster. You're going to feel good after eating and then crash an hour or two later. So, or maybe, fatigue kind of creeps up on you in the afternoon or something like that. Or, we're going to be sometimes we're going to have to reach for snacks or coffee or even sugar, just start feeling well, to feeling more normal or feeling awake again.
And this is because when your body isn't metabolically flexible, your body kind of panics when carbs aren't readily available.
Yeah. So it's got to do something. So it's like, okay, triggers the brain. Let's go. Body needs some stuff. We got to eat. So that's kind of what happens.
And then that's where specific cravings start to come in. So you're craving sugar or salt, things that are readily available to process quickly. People talk about getting hangry when they're hungry.
Who hasn't been hangry?
Right.
Exactly. We talk about that too. Long day, it's like, oh, we got to eat. So that's what happens. But it's sometimes it's hard to stick to some of these fasting or time restricted feedings sometimes because of that, actually.
And weight gain, especially around the middle, insulin resistance traps fat in the storage mode. So because it's like, I got to hang on to this. I don't know when I don't know if I'm going to have enough.
Right. So we increase our consumption of carbs and calories, if you will. You can think about it that way. And if we're not utilizing that fuel source, then it's going to get stored. And when it gets stored, the insulin is going to take it there and dump it off. And we're going to make fat because we're going to keep it for later. And insulin levels, when you have higher insulin levels, that will cause hypertrophy of fatty tissue and storage. And that just makes it that much harder then to try to get rid of it. So,
and metabolic inflexibility can also affect your sleep. When you have a lot of crashes during the night, blood sugar crashes dipping too low, that can create restless sleep or early waking. Without that stable energy from fat, your body can't repair properly at night.
Yeah. And then, of course, we're going to have the brain fog and the mood swings. So these glucose spikes and crashes, we don't want to see spikes. The spikes are basically, there's reasons why they do that. Whether it's the type of food we eat or the how we eat the food or the order in which we eat our food affects that also. And those spikes will create issues and troubles with insulin resistance. So steady energy affects neurotransmitters production and mood regulation, essentially.
So along with all this, we have increased risk for chronic disease, and insulin resistance is the root cause of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, PCOS, and Alzheimer's, which is commonly referred to lately as type 3 diabetes.
Right. Yeah. So this insulin resistance, as you can see, is kind of a driving force for chronic disease. And you can see a lot of chronic diseases and some cancers even tied back to this insulin resistance. So it's certainly something that has to be addressed and has to be understood.
Yep. So why is insulin resistance or metabolic inflexibility, why does that happen so much in midlife? Well,
hormonal changes. So men and women, and it's different for each. So, obviously we know that for women, perimenopause is going to bring on these fluctuations of the estrogen and progesterone. And that's going to directly impact that insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. So, and that's going to lead to the fat distribution and, some more energy regulation problems, just feeling fatigued or brain fogged. So,
yeah. And for men, testosterone is slowly declining, which in turn decreases the metabolic rate.
Yeah. So it's certainly something, and we talk about this a lot to patients that unfortunately women are really at a disadvantage because this occurs during the perimenopause phase. So it occurs sometimes quite rapidly, whereas men, it's a slow, gradual, decades type process. And so it's less noticeable. The men are going to get the big bellies, if you will, that commonly thought of as the beer belly. But with women, it's that when that estrogen and progesterone go into remission, if you will, then that can create that sensitivity spike. That insulin resistance occurs rather quickly then.
And the other piece that contributes to metabolic inflexibility is the loss of muscle. So after age 30, we've talked about this a lot, that muscle mass declines every decade after you turn 30. So it's so important to try to maintain muscle. But the muscle is the primary glucose disposal.
Yeah. Muscle is the source to get rid of glucose the easiest and the fastest, period. Full stop. Not only the muscle is such a vital, important set of tissues, if you will, in our system, that not only can it absorb the glucose directly, but also it takes it in from the insulin. So it has the double effect to reduce glucose. So we'll talk about some other options and ways, but this is kind of the important reason why we stress exercise.
Yeah. And then obviously when your cells age, they don't work as efficiently. So that also contributes to metabolic inflexibility.
Yeah. So we've got to work those mitochondria. The mitochondria have to be efficient. They have to, the ones that are not working so well need to get out of there and be replaced for ones that do work more efficiently. And the ways that we do that are activity and exercise. So
lifestyle accumulation. So as we grow older, we get habits. We have habits that kind of create what our lifestyle is, whether that be, sitting more, eating more processed foods and carbs, poor sleep, chronic stress. All of these things kind of accumulate over time, and that
creates that metabolic inflexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Also, part of that too is the increased inflammation and oxidative stress.
Right. So those things really do affect that. A lot of cellular metabolites can float around and from the oxidative stress and create troubles and problems with insulin resistance for us.
So how do you train your metabolism to become more flexible? That's what we're after,
yeah.
right?
So first thing on the list is, okay, what about, everybody talks about fasting, but it's more of an intermittent fasting, just some type of a fasting mechanism. Whether some people just don't like fasting, some people that it works well for them to do a 24-hour or longer fast for that matter. But you can get very similar effects by improving insulin resistance by just doing the intermittent fasting, which is more of what I like to really prefer to it as feeding windows.
Right.
So, but these windows of opportunity where we're eating in designated times, if you will, and then that's when we fuel. And then when we're not eating, our body is resting and digesting and repairing. And that's when our insulin levels and sensitivities improve.
Right. So when we can get a little bit more time between the last calorie from one day to the first calorie of the next day, that allows that insulin to kind of slow down and reset.
Right.
Because when we're eating like we do in today's life, the body never has to go without. So it's always thinking, oh, I'm going to be getting more to eat. So I've got to have all this insulin to take care of that.
Yeah. It's just like, always having the food available. If it's there, we're going to be eating it. So it's real hard to do that. So a lot of folks talking about having a limited amount of food in their refrigerator or their pantry, as if I've got it, I'm going to eat it. So if we can kind of space out those times and maybe not have some of that, we can have a little more caloric restrictions. So
low glycemic meals. So there's a couple different ways to think about low glycemic meals. First of all, you can think about the things that are going to just overall create the foods that are low glycemic. And we're talking protein. We're talking things with lots of fiber.
Protein, fat, and fiber.
Carbs are not the enemy. Like, carbs are good. You need them in the form of colored vegetables and, leafy greens. Even some fruits are really good.
Right. So the right source of carbohydrate is very important, not a highly processed sugar or starch carb.
Exactly.
Jelly beans are different than broccoli. So there's a difference there in that carb.
The other thing to think about when you're looking at low glycemic meals could be the way that you eat those meals. So if you're front loading your meal with the protein and fat and fiber, that is going to slow down the mobility, and then you can probably get away with a little bit of bread or a couple of potato chips or chips and salsa or something. So thinking about it twofold, not always just the healthy, low glycemic foods, but how can you work in some of the other things?
Right. And then, the other thing is movement after a meal, after we get through eating, if we can get any type of movement in, even if it's just air squats. I had a patient say, oh goodness, I can't do without my Coke. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you your Coke. You can have your Coke, but you got to give me 20 air squats every time you drink the Coke. So, that's the agreement. You got to take your wins when you can win them. But, these types of things are such that if we can get up and move and get the muscles activated and activate the mitochondria in the cell, then it's going to start taking up the glucose. That is going to slow your spike, and then that's going to reduce your insulin spikes. So then we'll have less insulin resistance also.
Yeah. So testing and tracking. I think we've gone over the lab tests in kind of detail, but fasting insulin, Homa-IR, hemoglobin A1C and triglycerides and HDL ratio are kind of the lab markers that are really key here. Some other things to look for would be waist circumference.
Yeah.
Want to make sure that you're
under 40 for a male and under 35 for a female.
I think that's not right. I think it's lower. I think it's
35
under
and
30.
30?
Yeah, I think it's 30. Optimal, I think,
optimal
is under 30 for female, 35 for males. Energy patterns. This is where we're kind of getting back into tune with our body. When you have that afternoon slump, does it typically happen after you've eaten lunch? And what did you eat for lunch?
Right. Yeah. So you'll see those spikes, and when it starts to go down, then we're going to, when the blood sugar starts dropping, well, then we're going to be starting to drop too. So that's kind of how that happens. And cravings are a good indication also to just listen to your body. What am I craving right now? So is it sugars, is it starches? And okay, well, am I craving meat or good fiber? Well, not usually. People don't crave those types of things sometimes. So we have to feed it correctly.
So one other way that we can track is continuous glucose monitors. And this is something that you can do you don't have to be a diabetic to utilize a continuous glucose monitor to really give you some good data, because every body is different. And something that I might eat would react in my body a lot different than someone else.
Right. Yes. And of course, basal metabolic rates are different between males and females too. So there are caloric needs and differences there too. But yes, those certain foods will affect people differently. Some people can eat a grape and not have a problem, whereas other people, it'll spike them. But
most people, the grape would spike, I think.
Exactly.
But a CGM is a great way to
see that.
To see that. And another thing that I love a CGM for is to know how stress affects your blood sugar too.
Right.
And different types of workouts. You can tell that you are less metabolically flexible when you've had a bad night's sleep. You're going to see that on a CGM. And I think sometimes it's just good to be able to see it. I don't think it's important to wear a CGM for months at a time. I think experimenting for 2 weeks, which is about how long one monitor would last. Dexcom has just recently come out with a over-the-counter product called Stello. And that's a really good way to kind of take a peek at what's going on with different foods that you're eating.
Yeah, and I know that with the CGM, I wore a CGM when I went for a race one time in a marathon, and I know my blood sugar went up, went 30 points during that race at one time. So as you see that stress will affect your blood sugar and that response. So, what else?
Well, I think we've kind of covered
most stuff here too. So, but looking at good walks, afterwards, after a 10 to 15 minute walk,
after a
meal is a good thing to do. Kind of focusing on that protein, fats, and fibers with each meal is a good thing to do. That's going to slow our absorption down.
Stress management.
Yeah. Kind of do the deep breathing, meditation, even yoga. Those things will help to really reduce that. I mean, I think yoga is really kind of more beneficial. The fact that it's actually going to stimulate your muscles to reduce the glucose, and then it's going to relax you. So I feel like that's kind of really a good activity to do afterwards.
Strength training. We talked about how muscle is our best organ for fighting blood sugar issues.
Yeah, you got to get the muscles, and it's something that you can count on it going down as we get older. So why not start high? And there is no age where you cannot start to build muscle at. You can build muscle at any age. So it
does get harder the older that you get. So
but you can do it.
Start as early as you can.
Right. And, zone 2 cardio, which is basically the conversations during exercise and activity. That's going to burn the fat. That's going to help us with the insulin resistance.
Track and learn. So pay attention to how you feel after you eat a certain meal. As I started really listening to my body, I had to give up some of my very favorite meals. And sushi is one of those because in Mexican, I eat sparingly now.
Yeah. Who
just
doesn't like Mexican?
It didn't feel good in my body. And before I kind of had the data and was really listening closely, I would just eat it anyway.
Right. Those tortilla chips, it gets everybody.
Getcha.
And then, prioritize sleep. Have a consistent bedtime. A consistent bedtime and a consistent wake up time. Try to keep on track. That's going to be something that's going to be important to just improve quality of sleep in general. And cut down on the screens and the just stimulation at bedtime. We don't want to be looking at a real stressful movie or anything of that nature too. You want to keep it kind of bland and lights down, low. But that good sleep hygiene makes a difference too at nighttime. Sleep in a nice dark place and not having the TV on to go to bed. Heavens. So
whole food nutrition is going to be really key for overall cellular health. Cutting out those processed foods. Shop the perimeter of the grocery store, the produce aisle and the meats.
Yep, the good stuff's on the outside. So, all right. Well, I hope that we've given you a little bit of information to kind of make some decisions about your own health. You just have to understand that insulin resistance is a major contributor to chronic disease, period. And chronic disease is on the rise. It is a crisis. And, yes, we've got issues with food and its availability and how it's made, but, there's things that you can do to help yourself. And I hope we've given you a little bit of information about that today. So
reach out if you have any questions, and otherwise we'll see you next time.
Have a healthy day.